Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is a prep coach and owner of No Switch Fitness. Today's guest is Luke Miller. Luke, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you having me on.
For sure, man. Excited to chop it up with you, Luke. The first question that I kind of start all of the conversations off with is, who are a few of your favorite bodybuilders of all time?
Yeah, so I kind of got exposed to bodybuilding through my brother. So he was like sending me videos of Ronnie Coleman and Jay Cutler, and that was kind of like the era of bodybuilding that I learned from. So I would certainly say Ronnie and Jay are probably top two for me, just from the freak factor and like being exposed to bodybuilding in that way. As you kind of develop through the years and you get into it, like that changes as you go through different eras, right? It kind of became Kai Green once you got into the Kai Phil era. And then that kind of transitioned into following Dallas McCarver through that era and that kind of stuff. So there's a few that have been kind of at the top of my list as I've gone through the eras, but first exposure would definitely be Ronnie and Jay. And I'd probably lean a little bit more towards Ronnie, just because of the head down, hardcore, get in there, lift it type of a mentality for sure.
I want to ask you this, Luke, since you are so deep into the bodybuilding community, in terms of kind of like, looking up to a bodybuilder, like more specifically, maybe their physique, it can be their lifestyle and maybe what they do outside of bodybuilding as well. But what kind of attracts you specifically? Let's start with physique wise to like a bodybuilder. Like what is it? Is it like, their like the structure of like the weight, small waist, and what is it for you that's like, man, like I love that physique?
Yeah, so there's actually like two shots that really kind of do it for me. It's like a rear lat spread, and then it's the transition into a side chest. And the reason I say that is because the overall density of physique is probably the thing that kind of attracts me the most. So some people may know, like there's this specific shot where Ronnie is hitting a transition right before he hits into the lat spread, where he's like throwing his hands back, and you just see this like dense like lat tissue into thoracolumbar fascia, glutes striated all the way out. And that was one of my favorite pictures growing up because it's just like the quality of the tissue is there. I don't get so caught up in the whole waist thing. I think as a product of getting into open bodybuilding, like, and that being the class that drew me into it. It's a nice visual, and I coach a lot of people that have that visual, but it's not something that's like first thing my eye goes to. It's like when you turn to that side and your back's facing the judges before you hit that side quarter and you see that erector hanging off the back, like that's probably the quality that I kind of attract to the most, right? Which is funny, you have the Dorian poster behind you because that's like characteristic 101 trait of Dorian, right? So that's definitely probably like the biggest characteristic trait for me, that and just like some big old quads. Like and the second aspect of that would be like an intellectual side. So it kind of carries two things, because the mentality side is kind of where I draw that density portion of the physique, like train hard, put load on your back type of a mentality, but also having some sort of objective viewpoint into why we're doing what we're doing, which is why as I kind of went through my bodybuilding experience, people like Ben Bukolski started to become pretty influential on the way that I carried myself, just because I'm I need to know why we're doing what we're doing type of person, which we'll kind of probably get into the whys when we get into my background a bit. But yeah, that's kind of like the two big things. It's like, I need some sort of understanding of like, okay, we're doing this because of X, Y, Z. And then just someone who you can tell has spent years with loads in their hands.
Very cool, man. Okay, Luke, at what age did you start lifting weights? And then why did you start lifting weights at that specific age?
Yeah, so I would have been, let's see, how old was I? 15. Golf was my pursuit at that point. So some people have heard this story, some may not have, but I played competitive golf for about 10 years, almost 11. I ended up stopped playing my senior year because I tore my meniscus. I lost my golf scholarships to my Division I schools that I was planning on going to. That's where that kind of translated into bodybuilding. So for me, it was originally like I wanted to lose weight, and then I wanted to be better on the golf course from a performance standpoint and being able to play at a higher level, because 15, 16, 17 is where golf really becomes like I was living out of a suitcase from the age of 12 to 18, pretty much the entire year. You every other week you're at a different location playing in a golf tournament, and it's just one of those things where it can take a toll on your body. So I had already kind of spent 3 years in that realm of like traveling every other week, playing golf tournaments all over the place. And I was like, I need something that's going to give me an edge on these people. So that's where it originally started. The gym that I ended up going to, had a large bodybuilding community. So then that just gradually progressed over the years until I did my first show at 19, I believe.
Okay. Cool. Now we're gonna dig into that a little bit more, because that's definitely go from a golfer to a bodybuilder. I don't know if I've heard that one yet on over 200 episodes of the podcast. So now I wanna ask you, Luke. We're gonna kind of just get into your backstory a little bit more and your childhood a little bit more in depth. But so you said 12 to 18, you're really focused on golf. But before we kind of get to that point, before golf kind of takes over, talk about where you actually grew up. Talk about your family environment a little bit. Just touch on that, and then we'll kind of transition into golf and take it from there.
Yeah, so I grew up in Mobile, Alabama. For those of you who don't know where that's at, it's like the very southern portion of Alabama. So really, really redneck culture, kind of southern grown, southern born. It was just me and my mom growing up. So my parents got divorced when I was probably about 1. My dad was kind of there occasionally throughout my childhood, but it was more so just me and my mom. My dad was a hunting guide in like central Alabama, so I would see him a couple times every few months, and that'd be about it. But sports was kind of like my whole childhood. I played baseball, I played soccer, I played basketball. Baseball was the big thing for me super young. So like the Chipper Jones era, Atlanta Braves, like that was like the whole thing. And then I got introduced to golf through my dad, actually, like 7, 8 years old. And I just had this like uncanny ability to play golf relative to all the other sports that I'd played. So I actually started competing in golf at around 8.5, 9 years old. And that's where it started to progress from like 9 years old playing in local tournaments. 10 years old, I'm starting to play regionally around the South. 11 years old, I'm already playing like national level events. And so that's kind of where the golf thing happened. And I basically got told to choose between baseball and golf at that point, and I chose golf. So that's kind of how that process developed. My mom, just from like a family environment standpoint, is a workaholic, very hard worker, but she was always there for me. So if you were going to do something, you did it 100% and you didn't leave anything on the table. And that's kind of where the whole no switch fitness comes from, is like mom's very big on, if you lose, you lose. But if you lost because you didn't give it everything that you had, that's on you. And so that was kind of ingrained for me from a very early age. My mom intellectually is a very smart individual, graduated college in 3 years, valedictorian of the high school that I went to. So that environment of like succeed at athletics, succeed at education was very kind of ingrained in me. But it was ingrained from the work side of things. Like she could care less if I came home with the first place trophy or if I came home with the last place trophy. It was more like, what did you put into it? And if you put more into it, most of the time you're coming home with more first place trophies than you are. Right. So that was kind of my childhood in a nutshell, like very focused. My mom didn't drink or do anything along those lines, not even socially. So it was a very focused environment for me. My mom was very focused on being the best parent she could be. And as a result, I felt that responsibility to be the best individual I could be growing up. So I've actually never drank before. Like that kind of culture just never really became a part of my childhood as a result of being grown up by my mom, but that's kind of where that background comes from.
Okay. Now I want to ask you a couple things, Luke. Now, in terms of not having your dad very present in your life, did at any point when you were growing up, did that affect you at all or not really at all?
No, I mean, he was there, but he just wasn't there that often. He would miss events very frequently. He lived like 2.5 hours away. So he was kind of there off and on till about 16, 17. The decision for me to not play golf anymore when I tore my meniscus was kind of what broke our relationship apart. And so he wasn't there like all the time, like a normal dad, but he would be at a golf tournament every once in a while, like all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't that he was there at all. It was just more so like the expectation you have as a dad when you see all your friends' dads at every event and all that kind of stuff. That just wasn't there. So as far as an effect on me, like I do feel like I had a tendency growing up looking for like a male role model. That changed throughout the years depending on what I was doing, but outside of that, I don't know if it overly changed me a lot, other than potentially kind of leaning emotionally to being a little bit more self-aware than the average male individual, just because grew up with my mom.
Now, you mentioned earlier something about your brother's the one that really exposed you to bodybuilding. So was it just you and your brother? You have other siblings?
So it's actually they're my stepbrothers. I have two. They're from my dad's first marriage, and so there's a large age gap between us. So I didn't actually grow up with them in the household. So my middle brother, who's the one that exposed me to bodybuilding, he's like 11 years older than me. And then the other one is like 15, 16. So they were kind of already on their own doing their thing by the time we were just by myself, my mom and I. So yeah, so that was kind of they weren't overly involved in like the whole house dynamic either. They'd visit occasionally, but it wasn't like a permanent sibling in the house. It was just constantly me and my mom.
Okay. Okay. One other question I have for you before we talk a little bit more about golf and transition out of the earlier years. You said that you lived like a very focused life and that was kind of driven by your mom. Now, sometimes that, being ultra focused as a younger person, that can be a positive thing, but it also, from my own personal experience, it can have some negative effects as well. So did you ever feel like any pressure, or did that ever kind of like get to the point where it's like, man, like you see maybe some other kids partying or doing some different things than what you were doing? Did you ever have thoughts of like, man, like I don't really like this box maybe that I'm living in? Maybe you didn't think about it like that when you were a teenager, but you get my point.
Yeah, no, I think maybe the difference, and this could be a wording issue on my end, is it was never forced upon me.
Okay.
There was always the choice to do whatever I wanted to do. My mom wanted me to be happy doing whatever it is that I wanted. She just didn't want me to do anything less than my best. So the expectation on her end wasn't, you have to play golf, you have to play baseball, you have to do this. It was find what it is that you love and just do it to the best of your abilities. And that's why I said like she didn't care whether I came home with first place or last place. It's because the expectation was that I was enjoying what I was doing and that I was giving it my all. And so I almost felt personally, because I saw how much my mom invested into me as a kid, that I had to uphold it myself. So it was a self-inflicted kind of focused environment. My mom was like super supportive in anything that I wanted to do. She even supported the decision to stop playing golf if it was what I wanted to truly do. That was just the question she had, was that, are you sure this is what you want to do? With you've been doing this since you were 8, right? So it's like 10 years later and you're deciding to take a different role or path. So it was probably more self-inflicted. Like I did all the normal stuff that kids did. Like we went to Atlanta Braves games, Mobile Bay Bears games, and all that kind of stuff. It was just being that it was a single parent household, when golf travel started to be what was necessary to compete. We didn't really do the whole vacation thing and all that kind of stuff, just because financially that was what we could do, right? It just financially, it was you know, we can't really do vacations because we're doing this golf thing, right? So it was a self-inflicted pressure. And to further this, I grew up in a Catholic household. So I went to Catholic preschool through high school. So there was also that like fear of God instilled in me quite a bit too. So a combination of like wanting to be the best I could be as a golfer with the religious side kind of kept me in my bubble very, very much.
All right, cool. Now let's talk a little bit about golf here before we get into your further education stuff. So obviously you started at a very young age. I guess what I want to ask Luke, a couple things from the golf time. First of all, like what looking back, what's kind of like the major takeaway from those years playing golf? And do you have kind of like a highlight or maybe a golf tournament that really sticks out in mind where it's like, man, this was just a great experience?
Yeah, no. So the work ethic side was probably the part that translated the most. It's an individual sport. It's all on you at every point in time on a golf course. Out of my own personal desire to be there as much as I was, during the summers, like I would ask my mom to drop me off at like 6:45 in the morning and pick me up on our way home at dark. And so like I'd be there 6:45 to 7 because summers it's long days, like 7:30, it's not getting dark. And so that was strictly I was there because I wanted to be better and I enjoyed it. And I didn't really have friends in the school that I was going to. I was more had friends that were playing golf. That was kind of my dynamic. So we would just spend all day out there. So probably the work ethic side, like granted, it's not the same as bodybuilding where it's 24 hours a day and the food and the sleep and all that. But there is a large time investment when it comes to playing golf at a high level. And that really translated well into bodybuilding. I think that's where like a lot of that I just draw on that experience a lot is because it is so self-determining. Like it's all on you to do whatever it is. And that's why I never really enjoyed team golf growing up. So you have like high school golf and then collegiate golf from there. But at the end of the day, when you're playing on tour, it's like it's on you, right? So that was kind of the mentality I had. What was the second portion of that question?
Just maybe one of the tournaments that was a highlight for you or something that was pretty cool that you got to experience just as
Yeah. Yeah, so it would definitely be US Kids Junior World. So I was 12 playing in Pinehurst, North Carolina. And for those in the golf realm, Pinehurst is one of the most legendary courses kind of in the golf community, right? So when we look at like that tournament, what ended up happening is I qualified for the US national team. So essentially what happens is the world tournament, people from all over the world come and play. They take the top 10 US and the top 10 internationals, and they compete together on what's called the Pinehurst #2 course, which is a legendary course for Payne Stewart back in like the 90s. And that moment for me was like, man, I could do this at a really high level because I was playing I think the 8th spot or the 9th spot on the US team against the top 10 international players. And it's like at that age to be exposed to that level of competition was really cool. And it was a moment that I'll never forget because the way it works is you play the tournament and they call you after you're finished that night. So you get that phone call that you made the team and it's like unreal. So that's probably the one that stands out because that for me, that was a moment where I was like, if I just spend enough time working as hard as I can to do whatever it is that I want to do, eventually at some point it's going to pay off. And so that's probably like the highlight, right? And there's a couple others, like I had a state championship title and a couple other things, but that's probably the biggest one for me that kind of stood out.
Are any of the guys that you competed against like throughout your 10 years doing it, like on the PGA tour, or any guys that we might know in terms of popular golfers? If I'm probably not a lot of the people watching or listening to the podcast
No,
are like myself too much into golf outside of I don't know, Tiger Woods, Rory McIlroy, I know those two. That's about it. But
Yeah, so there's actually quite a few that play professional golf that I grew up playing with. So no one you would probably really know off the top of your head, but one of my closest friends through that time area, Robbie Shelton, is just earned his status on the PGA Tour again. So I would say like probably about 30 to 40% of the guys I grew up playing with play professional golf at some level. Jordan Spieth was kind of not too far off of my age group. So we played at tournaments that would have been similar. I didn't know Jordan like that, but yeah, there's quite a few that I grew up playing against that play professional golf nowadays. There's a picture on my wall at home from a tournament called the Future Masters of the top 10, because I made the top 10 in that tournament. I think if I remember correctly, 4 of that top 10 play professional golf.
cool.
So it's like a lot of my peers are doing that nowadays. So
Awesome, man. That's super cool. All right. So Luke, let's transition. So you hurt your knee, and then that's kind of the transition into more lifting weights and bodybuilding. You said I think 18, 19, you did your first competition. So why don't you take us from golf into bodybuilding? Walk us through that. Kind of just the introduction of it, because I don't want to get too far into bodybuilding yet, because I also want to get into college and your education before we dive fully into coaching and bodybuilding.
Yeah. So the decision to pursue bodybuilding for me kind of I was right before I turned 18. So I would have been 17. There was a little bit of a transition period where I got the injury. I lost the scholarships. I kind of spent a good bit of time in almost like a depressive state, if you want to put it that way, where I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. A lot of meetings with people that were involved in my progress as a golfer. And about 3 to 4 months after that happened, I was like, it's just time for me to hang it up. And I don't know what specifically it was that made me think that at the time. It is a little bit of a regret of mine, just because I feel like if I would have pursued it, I would have done it at a high level, but hung it up. And then I started training with a group that all competed in bodybuilding at the gym. And that's kind of where I got exposed to competitive bodybuilding. My brother was already sending me the videos and stuff, and I was kind of getting into it, and spent like 4 or 5 months training. I was like, I want to give this a go. But I was graduating high school, transitioning into college. And so I was like, I'm gonna get through my freshman year of college and then compete the first summer after my freshman year. I ended up competing twice that summer, and I was hooked. Like there was a lot of development from a mentality standpoint that happened from my senior year of high school through that freshman year of college, because it's where I caught the bug of learning for a sport or something along those lines. Because like with the high demand from academics, from like the family environment, like I pretty much had a full ride wherever I wanted to go just because of my academics and that kind of stuff. So I wanted to translate that into something that I enjoyed. And when we kind of get into college, you'll kind of see how that progresses. But it was really, really an interesting transition for me, because it took the individual aspect of golf and transitioned it to bodybuilding, which became this individual pursuit, almost out of pulling myself out of losing the opportunities that I had.
Okay, so that first competition that you did, how did it go? And like, I mean, what did you kind of take away from that? And then we'll kind of get into college, because this did happen before your freshman year in college, right?
It was summer after freshman year, so it would have been like kind of in between freshman and sophomore.
Go ahead and just talk about that first competition, then we'll get into college.
Yeah, so I actually ended up doing 2 that summer, so about 2 to 3 weeks apart. Mobile, Alabama, Heart of Dixie. I don't even know if they do the show anymore. But it was a challenging experience. You know how it is for everyone's first prep. It's not what you expect getting into it, right? The difference is I loved every moment of it. Like there was never a moment where I felt like I wanted to cheat on my diet or anything like that. At the time, the coach that I was working with was a very teacher role for me, kind of taking me under his wing and was teaching me everything he knew and that kind of stuff. So forever grateful for that guy. His name's Christian Simmons, out of Mobile, Alabama. But yeah, he kind of took me under his wing and pushed me harder than I've ever been pushed. And you know, the one thing you don't know when you go into it is, what is the stage going to feel like? Like, you love the work, you love the process. What does the stage feel like? And honestly, I got up there and loved it. Like, it was the final payoff of the process that I enjoyed. I really enjoyed posing, which is something people don't overly know about me as much, because I do spend a lot of time teaching posing and love that aspect of it. And I actually got like complimented on the posing of my first show for a first show type of a thing. So it was good. I did the teenage category. I think I was the only teen in the show. So of course, you know, you win, but you're the only one that showed up. So, and then I did novice, and I believe I got second or third in the novice category. So genetically, as a natural athlete, I wasn't the best for bodybuilding. I was like 150 pounds soaking wet on stage. So it was fun though. It was something that I didn't realize would transform the way that I thought about everything that I did from there. And it really showed, because it just kind of changed the direction of my college a little bit as well.
Beautiful, man. Okay, so let's get into college talk now. From your Instagram, I see that you've got your master's degree, so that means you went to college for a little bit of time. So why don't you talk about transitioning from high school into college?
Okay.
Talk about what you studied for your undergraduate, your master's, and then you kind of talked or mentioned that the transition from golf into bodybuilding and doing your first couple competitions, that really kind of gave you that drive to learn. So just talk about that transformation in your life, along with what you studied and things like that, Luke.
Yeah, so college started for me at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, so UAB. I was originally a biomedical engineering major. It eventually got changed to mechanical. So my undergrad degree is technically in mechanical engineering, but the research that I did while I was there was very physical, like human body in nature. So it started freshman year. I was doing like orthotic prosthetic design. When I transferred into the mechanical department, it turned into like football helmet research. So we were studying impacts of football players and the rates of concussion within that for football players. So that was kind of undergrad experience for me, trying to translate my love for bodybuilding into something that I was studying. Obviously, engineering school is not all that like physiology based, but it's very mechanics based. So I learned like the mechanics of movement and translate that into the human body very well. What ended up happening is, did my mechanical engineering degree at Birmingham, UAB, loved the research that I was a part of. I got out into the field as an engineer, and it was nothing like my college experience. Like, the job field and the job market for the degree I ended up having the title of was nothing related to what I was doing research in. So I hated it. And so during that time, kind of like through undergrad, I was competing. I caught the compete every year bug. So like summer between freshman and sophomore, summer between sophomore, junior, summer between junior, you know how it is. And just fell in love with the whole bodybuilding process. And I say that changed like the direction of my college, because it started with going to school for engineering because I wanted to do something where biomedical engineering started, where I could translate my love for like math and science into something that would be well paying after a 4-year degree and still be kind of close to human physiology. Obviously, you go through that degree, the title technically gets changed on it. Not very marketable for biomedical positions. Where the stuff that I was doing from a career standpoint, I hated it. Where I knew that even though the goal at the time was to make enough money to open my own gym, that wasn't the direction I needed to go in order to do that. So that's where grad school came into play. So I worked as an engineer out in the field for probably about, I want to say 6 months before I applied to grad school. And I ended up applying to both the University of Florida and the University of South Florida. I actually started grad school at UF. It was the 3rd ranked program in the nation for human physiology and human performance. It's like, of course I'm going to go there. So I started my first semester of grad school there, and it was very research based, which was fine. I was used to that from undergrad, but it wasn't what I wanted to pursue because I'd already started coaching when I graduated college from undergrad. So I knew that was kind of what the direction I wanted to go. And after my first semester, I transferred over to USF, which is where my graduate degree ended up coming from.
And then what did you get your master's degree in then specifically?
It's human. I think it's technically exercise physiology, but it's like a human phys degree.
Okay. So going from undergraduate to then getting your graduate degree, I mean, what did you kind of take away from getting your master's degree? And I want to ask you this because I have an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree in exercise science, and for years and years and years, I'm just like, I would love to get a master's degree. The honest truth is, though, Luke, the biggest deterrent for me is the financial side. It's like, okay, I'm going to invest a lot of money, just like I did with my undergraduate degree, to go get this, 2 more years of schooling. Is it really worth it? Right? Like, is it really worth it? Because I don't think it's really worth it with the bachelor's degree that I got. That's for another story or podcast time. But so what did you kind of gain from your master's degree? And do you feel like it's been worth it in terms of, do you really need your master's degree for what you're doing and the type of money that you're making current day?
Yes. And I will say it's probably a little bit specific to the program I went to. So for those of you who don't know about the graduate program at USF, Dr. Bill Campbell's the head of the grad program there. His laboratory is called the Physique Science Lab. So there's a lot of us that go to school there that end up coaching, and they're kind of known for spitting out coaches at various different levels, whether it be strength and conditioning, what we do as an online coach in bodybuilding, online gym pop coaches. Like everybody that I hung out with in that grad program, we all coach online now. So I think my experience with my graduate degree was a little skewed because of the program that I was at. Very influential teachers and Dr. Campbell and Dr. Buckner, very plugged into research while I was there and understanding the cross application. So this is where the program at USF for me shined more over the UF. Is everything that I was doing there, I was learning like nitty-gritty physiology and research-based methodologies and understanding how that translates. But I had started coaching with John Jewett my right after I graduated undergrad. So I had been with John for probably about a year, a little over a year when I went back to grad school. Or no, actually it was less than that, about 6 months. And John had kind of taken me under his wing. God knows why, my 180-pound little bodybuilder self. But I think it potentially could have been just the mentality and the way that I approached coaching with him. Because his response to me was like the most detailed inquiry form that he had received. So he kind of taken me under his wing, and this process started of me like, okay, this is what I learned in my master's degree. What does this look like for someone who's coaching and competing at the highest level? Because he had just won his pro card, he had just turned to the pro ranks and all that. And so we kind of like, my experience through grad school was getting exposed to high level intellectual, and then taking that and taking it to John and being like, okay, how can we use this? And so this is where this whole dynamic started. And for me, it was very influential in the way that I thought about bodybuilding, because it went from this personal, emotional pursuit all through undergrad to this analytical, objective pursuit. And it's kind of birthed kind of what I've become today, because I spent hours and hours and hours and hours learning during undergrad, but being in engineering, you're not exposed to people who are doing research and exercise phys. Going to grad school exposed me to that. So like Dr. Buckner with his blood flow restriction research, Dr. Campbell with his physique specific research. I was a part of some studies while I was there. I was also doing strength and conditioning for the USF football team. So I was honing my ability to coach with some of the best coaches in strength and conditioning. So it's kind of one of those things where all of that together started to form a different version of the way that I viewed bodybuilding. Because it changed from this emotional attachment to things and emotional attachment to bodybuilding to this, how do I objectively make this the best process that I can make it? And now that's just my entire pursuit, is like, how objective can I be with the process, no matter who it is that I'm working with?
Excellent. Okay, I want to ask you, Luke, in terms of this whole online coaching world that we're now living in, right? It's unique to say the least. I would say from my personal perspective, but I want to ask you from your personal experience and your professional perspective. Do you feel like it's important for people to do some sort of in-person training / coaching, however you want to word all that? Do you feel like that's a great foundational starting point for somebody that wants to get into online coaching? Or do you think it's a-okay just to kind of jump into the online coaching thing and go from there?
No, I'm a very big proponent of doing in-person work before you start. So I obviously mentioned the strength and conditioning. So that was like almost the entirety of my grad school, except for my last semester, where I was doing a lot of in-person work. So I was involved with a lot of teams, not just the football team, where we were running sessions and making sure we were fixing everything. Before I went to grad school, I'd already started like training people on the side. So I was like doing that in-person work. When I graduated from grad school, online coaching wasn't making me enough money. So I was actually running PT departments for a gym called Fitness Connection. So I spent a lot of time in that in-person setting. And the reason I'm a big proponent of it is because sometimes you don't even know what you're looking for online if you haven't seen it before on the floor. And that just comes with the experience of working with the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and different presentations of morphologies that we have across people, whether it be like strictly a mechanical viewpoint of like femur links, humerus links, that kind of stuff, or even just a functional understanding of someone's background and where their limitations are on a gym floor. And I think, and shout out to Jordan Shallow for this, but with Prescript, but he was the first one that kind of expose that thought process for me of this functional presentation of the individual, where I kind of took that to heart when I was in grad school, when I was coaching, and I was like, okay, I'm going to look for every single different presentation of this while I'm on the floor and figure out how to solve that problem. To now, it's like, you can send me pictures as an online client, and 9.5 out of 10 times, I'm going to be able to know functionally where you're at without even seeing you move. Because if you combine like a background or a history alongside a functional or a physical presentation of like femur links, rib cage structure, pelvis structure, resting position, you have a good idea of how this person moves. And so that was like a big proponent as to why I don't think online coaching can be done at a high level unless you've spent that time in person.
Excellent. Okay. Now I want to take a step back into your kind of more of your bodybuilding story specifically.
Okay.
And then we're going to kind of finish up with some more coach talk and some specific questions that I have for you, Luke.
Yeah.
So you did your couple of shows, I think you said between your freshman and sophomore year of college. So why don't you just unpack the rest of your kind of your competition history and how competitively bodybuilding has gone for you up to this point?
Yeah, so I've competed 7 shows. Yeah, 7 shows across 5 prep seasons. So my first 2, I ended up doing 2 each season, and then 1 each season from there. So obviously first one's just teenage division, did well. Second ones were me competing in what used to be called the juniors. So I think it's what we consider novice nowadays. And the expectation back then, which is so funny because things have changed so much, is you had to win in the juniors before you would go compete in the open. And so that year that I did juniors, I ended up winning the show in juniors. And so like my next step was to give the open a shot. And that was the following year between junior and senior year of college, where I was like a welterweight. I think I was 166 pounds, but shredded to the gills. It was my first show using PEDs. So I competed nationally my first 4 shows. And it did fine. I think I got second in that class or whatever to a guy that was a little bit bigger than me. And then I competed the following year at the Alabama State show, did horribly, had a horrible prep, wasn't very well ran. And then the year after that, no, not the year, 2 years after that, 2019, I did the Europa in Orlando because I was down in Florida for grad school, which I think I got third in that first call out in the light heavies, in a class of like 10 guys. So not bad. Competitively for me, my pursuit has changed a lot as I've gone through it. It originally started to compete as a bodybuilder and continue competing as a bodybuilder as like my main pursuit. To nowadays, it's like I do it because I love it. And I still have something to prove to myself from a competitive standpoint of where I can compete at and what level I can compete at. But I honestly don't even know from a competitive bodybuilding standpoint for myself how much longer I have, just because of the level that I'm coaching at. Because I'm pretty much at shows every weekend. Like I'm either at home online coaching all these people across the globe at shows, or I'm going to these shows, and I prefer to be there. So if I can make it happen, I make it happen. And not that that's not manageable in pursuing competitive bodybuilding. It certainly is. It's just, I pour my all into my coaching to the point that I put it in front of my competitive bodybuilding nowadays. I want to compete nationally as a bodybuilder personally and see kind of how that unfolds. So I'll probably continue to compete for like 3 to 5 years, depending on how the next 2 years go. But no matter what, my personal pursuit of bodybuilding will never supersede my clients' journeys. Coaching and educating is where I'll have the largest impact, and I'm very aware of that, because of the level that I'm coaching at now and the athletes that I'm coaching and the shows that we're winning. And even the people's lives are impacting. Like and this is a blessing to be able to do this, but I don't really go to a show anymore and not get stopped and being thanked for the content we do through J3 University or the podcast or the YouTube page or whatever, right? Or they've talked to one of my clients that prepped with me and had a fantastic experience. And it's like, you see that and it's hard to detach yourself from that. And I just know that genetically I'm not the best bodybuilder in the world. So that pursuit will come to an end at some point fairly soon, 3 to 5 years probably, because I just see myself as a coach being at the highest level.
What is before your competitive bodybuilding comes to an end, Luke, what would you like to accomplish when you kind of hang up the posing trunk, so to speak, and walk away from stepping back on stage? I mean, you'll be satisfied if you accomplish what competitively as a bodybuilder?
I mean, obviously the quick answer is pro card, right? Like that's everybody's like end goal, right? But honestly, like if I step on a national stage as a heavyweight bodybuilder or a super, depending on where my physique pushes me towards, and I'm in the mix at a national show, like fighting for the card, missing it by a spot or two, or end up winning it. For me, that's all I want out of my competitive career, is just to prove that my physique was capable of being on the best stage, the best amateur stages of the world. And for me, that's pretty much it. And if you would have asked me this a year and a half ago, that answer would not be the same. So it's ever evolving, probably. And the more I coach, the more it evolves. And I don't want to say the less I care about my personal bodybuilding. That's still very, very important to me. And I treat it as such. Like my whole log on the J3 University forum details everything that I'm doing. So it's every day is the same. It's still Groundhog Day. I'm still doing the same things. But I'm also very aware of the level that some of my athletes are capable of competing at. And it is eons past where I'm capable of competing at. And so that's more important to me nowadays than my own personal pursuit.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about because you've mentioned J3 University a lot, and that's something I wanted to bring up. So, yeah. And you already mentioned your connection with John, but I'm assuming that your connection with John, it sounds like you got connected with him around your senior year in college. That was a very pivotal connection. in your life and in your career, and then obviously being a big part, an educator with J3 University. It's really brought you to the forefront in terms of bodybuilding, fitness, and education. So talk about connecting with John a little bit more in depth, and then talk about the evolution of J3 University, and just expound on that a little bit more. I know what that is. Probably a lot of people watching and listening to this episode know what it is, but there may be some people that don't know necessarily what the specifics are. So give us the specifics on J3 University as well, Luke, please.
Yeah, it's been a concept John wanted to do for a long time. Excuse me. So I talked about how he kind of took me under his wing, kind of before he blew up into the level of competitor that he is now. To the point that, like, while I was in grad school, he would do a 1-hour phone call with me for free, mind you, to go over the content that I was doing in grad school and translate that into like what I'm doing as a coach every other week. And so, like, I would come with a list of questions. I would send it to him beforehand. I would show up, we'd answer the questions. I'd have follow-up questions, and then I'd go about coaching the 30 clients that I had at the time or whatever. And continue down that journey and that path. And then it would also push me to looking into things more. And it was probably, I was in grad school. I remember this day. It was before I had like really been known in the bodybuilding circles. Like, people knew me, but not to the level that I do now. And he was like, presented this idea of J3 University to me. I want to say it was like late 2018. And I was like, and he asked me to be involved with it and help with the development of it and all that kind of stuff. And I remember the day that he sent me that message and sent over the contract terms for me to sign. And it was like, I literally cried on the couch, because it was like the moment that I felt like I could do something in bodybuilding that would be a career. And after a couple failed attempts at trying to make J3 University happen, John eventually linked up with Mark. We'd had a lot of web developer issues. So people not doing the work that they said they were going to do, not doing it to the level that they said they were going to do. John linked up with Mark and was like, hey, like, I just need to get this sorted and get it done and knock it out. And so basically what would happen is John would work on it. I would proofread some of it. He would send it over to me, proofread it. From a branding perspective, it made a lot of sense because he had put the work into the actual course, like actually making J3 University the base course, that he just launched it on his own with him and Mark, and kind of communicated it like I was going to be an educator at some point, when we kind of transitioned into it being that level of content. And so I don't even remember what year it was he brought me on as an educator, but he released the course. It obviously exploded. And then he brought me on as an educator, co-host of the podcast, all this kind of stuff. And it just developed into what it is today. And so now we have multiple courses. So J3 University is kind of the base course. We do live streams every week, either me or John. We have a forum where we answer all the questions that people have for applying it to themselves and their clients and all this kind of stuff. We have AHO, which is Applied Hypertrophy module, which is something John and I built about optimizing training. And then we have the female module coming out in a couple months. So it's kind of continually developed into this thing that we're building together, and it's unbelievable. And it all starts with John, right? Like, this doesn't happen without John kind of taking that initial step, and just honestly blessed to be a part of it. Even when I was just the person like previewing the slides and like sending him feedback back, to the point now where it's like I had this head educator role alongside John and building content for the platform and all this. It's really cool because you see the change. John doesn't go to a show without getting stopped every 15 minutes, right? Like, it's somebody's using the content for their prep. And so it's really awesome to be a part of something that we're both educating at a level that's changing the way coaches are coaching their clientele. And to be able to have that dynamic, because a lot of the stuff that we put in there has come from conversations where John and I have played devil advocate with each other and just like went back and forth and gone over these kinds of things in an application setting. So, and I think that's probably the difference for us is there's a lot of people who educate and they educate only, and that's cool. Like, if that's your thing, do it. But we need to see that education and talk at a high level be translated into what we're actually doing as coaches. And this is the big disconnect. Like, anybody can take a fucking camera, plug it in, review exercise form video and say, oh, you should execute this because of XYZ. But it's like, that person that's taking that video has never won a fucking show with a client. It's like, it's not, a lot of times it's square peg in a round hole when you're working with certain people. It's like, these don't always apply. And so this is where J3U is like that dynamic course environment, and is why we do the live streams and the forums. Is like, you can recite and reverberate information at whatever level you want because you heard XYZ say it. The difference is the application side of like merging it. And like, I'm very passionate about that, and is why I put my coaching before everything. Is I can talk with some of the best educators in the field, have that conversation, but it doesn't stick with me unless you're putting athletes on stage week in, week out, nailed. And I just don't care who you are. If you're not doing that, it's not going to reverberate. And that's kind of where this whole thing is kind of this little idea John had in 2018 into what it is now. And it's been cool to be a part of it.
Now, just for clarification's sake, and so I understand and other people understand, the J3 University, basically it's a platform. First of all, it's an app, correct?
Yeah, it's an app, and it's a website that has this whole self-guided course.
Okay, so if somebody wants to learn how to coach, become a better coach, and learn how to bodybuild and be a better bodybuilder, they can subscribe to J3 University, and that's basically what they're going to get, like coaching, bodybuilding, deep dives into the weeds, like very in-depth education. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the course itself is very in-depth, nuts and bolts education. And then there's obviously like takeaway outcomes from that. With the course, you get the forums and the live stream, which is where that content kind of comes to life. Is because like, we're in the forums helping people prep people. Like, that's kind of where a lot of this comes to fruition. Or we're on the live streams answering questions live for people to understand how to use it with themselves or their clients. So I would say like the course itself is not, it's mainly for coaches because that's who gravitates to it, but it's also for athletes who just want to be a better athlete. I'm a big proponent in athletes learning more to be a better athlete for the coach that they're working with. Because you don't know what you don't know, right? And if it helps you execute at a higher level, you're going to be a better athlete because of it. So it's across many aspects of the bodybuilding realm. We even have coaches who don't coach bodybuilders who learn a lot from it and are able to use it. And that's just going to further expand, especially with this female module coming up, because it lays the framework of potentially almost every problem you're going to come up with a female clientele. And even to the point of helping them get into the right clinic to get the help that they need if you don't feel versed enough to manage it yourself. And so that's kind of where like the impact starts to expand. But yeah, that's what you get. It's self-guided course. You get the forums and the live streams and our athlete logs too. And then we have the AHO and the female module coming that are separate from the actual J3U course.
Now, is this like a one-time purchase? Is this monthly subscription? How does the payments work? Because I know money is always something that's a challenge for some of us.
Yeah, it's a one-time. So it's a one-time purchase, lifetime access. Honestly, John underprices it for what's in there, but it is what it is. But yeah, it's just a one-time. And it's the same for all the other ones too. All the other courses are one-time purchases as well.
Cool. Awesome. Okay. Now I don't know if it's being devil's advocate, but I want to kind of ask you, Luke, because my personal perspective with the bodybuilding community, you kind of have two sides. You have the people that are like very scientific, very intellectual, like really in the weeds of like, the mechanics and all that. And then you have the people that just kind of, and I'm going to say that I probably fall in this category a little bit more, where it's like, I just want to lift weights and I just want to bodybuild. And I don't want to think about all this stuff. Like it can be overwhelming, right? Especially when you're just starting out. So, and going back to kind of like, your favorite bodybuilder of all time, Ronnie Coleman, like I've listened, I grew up in the same era. It was Ronnie. Jay's my favorite. But if you listen to those guys in interviews, especially Ronnie, like, I mean, Chad Nichols took care of his nutrition and supplementation. Ronnie just basically went through the motions, put in the work, and did his thing. Like, I never really heard anything like scientific coming from Ronnie's mouth
Yeah.
or Jay Cutler. I mean, Chris Aceto was the big influence early in his career. Jay's like always talking about kind of doing 12 reps. And it just seemed back then it was more basic and simple, right? So I guess kind of what I want to pull out of you, Luke, how can we kind of merge the two, the scientific and getting into the weeds, but also keeping it simple and not getting like, paralysis by analysis? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. So let me start with how it developed for me, because bodybuilding wasn't always this for me, right? It originally started with put your head down, work, train hard, that emotional attachment to it that I talked about. My genetic capacity for bodybuilding is what pushed me into this pursuit of perfecting the process. And I think that's it. While John is a top 4 Olympian, that's also where it kind of started for him, because he wanted to compete at the highest level. But if he kept down this path of just kind of doing what was reverberated, he probably wouldn't have got there. And so that's kind of where it's a development over time for a lot of us. And so for most of us, we started in that same place. Like, just put your hood up, play some loud music, yell, yeah, buddy, before you do a set, and then go, right? And I guess that's probably the difference for John and I, is like both of us started there. And that passion for that emotional attachment to bodybuilding is always a part of us. It's just been a product of like the people that we coach, that or our own personal pursuits, that we've learned to perfect this craft. And we'll never perfect it, but we're in that pursuit of it, right? Where our role as a coach is to go into those weeds so that we can simply communicate it to our clientele, which is where being a coach plays a very valuable role. Is like, if you do get overwhelmed with it, I'm not going to overwhelm you with that information. I'm just going to tell you what you need to do. And that's kind of where, like, there's a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but someone that is a master of their craft is not someone who can talk in the weeds. It's someone who can take the information that's in the weeds and simplify it for the simple layperson. And that's kind of where we're at now. It's like, if we don't have to go there, we're not going to. We're just going to tell you what to do. But if you want to go there, we can, right? And that's kind of where we simplify it for people. And that's where we want to be, is taking, like, I could go talk to a PhD in research over here if I wanted to, but if I'm coaching someone who's 2 years in the bodybuilding, I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to say, hey, let's do this because we need to do this to be better. And so that's probably where we kind of bounce back and forth quite a bit. Is our initiation into bodybuilding was that just head down, train hard, DC training, like, force reps, RPs, that kind of stuff, into something that developed into this, get into the weeds to be best. And it's like, for me, it's like with my clientele is kind of where I see that come to fruition. Is like I had a girl win a pro card this year that 2 years beforehand was 3rd call outs at North Americans. It's like, you're taking someone who may not be the genetic elite and turning them into a pro. It's like, that going into the weeds is what allows that to happen. And so that's kind of where a lot of this stems from.
Awesome, man. Love it. Okay. I want to ask you, we don't talk about, drugs or PEDs very much on this podcast, unless it's brought up. You kind of mentioned just a little bit ago, I think your first 3 or 4 shows were natural, and then you transitioned over. But I do want to ask you, because I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to see your name on the podcast, and they know there's going to be some knowledge bombs dropped, right? So for the sake of the listeners and the subscribers, I do want to kind of give them some content that some of them say that they wish we talked more about on the podcast, which we're not going to, because there's plenty of podcasts out there that talk about PDs, and I personally don't know anything about them. So we're just not going to talk about it. But for everybody out there that's watching and listening, I do want to ask you, Luke, in terms of the clients that come to you, in terms of what you hear about from other people, from John, what have you, what are some of the biggest, like, drug mistakes or PED mistakes do you have presented to you, or do you hear about in terms of like people are doing like this and they shouldn't be? I don't even really know how to word it because that's not my realm, but I think you kind of know what I'm trying to ask. So could you kind of expound on that, please?
Yeah, so this is a tough question because there's so much wrong with our industry, right? I'll narrow it down a bit though.
Yeah.
So one of the problems we run into in our industry is like the low barrier of entry. You look good on Instagram with your clothes off, you can probably start a coaching business, right? So for me, the biggest mistake in PED usage is non-logical deployment. What does that mean? So people writing PED protocols without having a sequential logic as to why we're doing what we're doing. That's not to say, and this is why I no longer use the term safer use, that risk is not associated with PED usage. Because if you want to compete at the highest level, there is going to be risk involved. My question for you is, are you doing everything that you can to mitigate that risk while still deploying compounds at a level that is going to allow you to compete at that level? And this is where like John and I break it down conceptually. And like, this is something I proposed like to him about like safer use may be like a misnomer because it's not used at the highest level, is low risk, medium risk, high risk PED models. Obviously, we're always going to use prophylactic strategies to manage health. We're going to track lab work. We're going to do echocardiograms and all these kinds of stuff. But understanding that even if we're taking high risk with our PED design, there still needs to be logical reasons as to why we're deploying everything we're deploying. And I don't see that from a lot of coaches. I think there's more coaches who have a pharmacological understanding that's allowing for that to happen nowadays than ever. But I still think we run into that where it's just like, I turned XYZ pro on this stack, and so I'm going to put you on this stack type of a thing. We actually just recorded a podcast on this, so it's kind of fresh. And it's like, that's great. More does work better. You can't argue that, but why? Can we explain why we're progressing up to this dose, or even people starting at this dose? It's like, there's probably a better way to do this. And that's all I'm looking for, is a better way to do it and fitting the PED model to the risk that person wants to take. There's a lot of people in this industry who want to compete, who are still on the low risk side, and they don't really care if they compete at the highest level. They just want to do it and look good and feel good and compete, but not ruin the rest of their life or potentially take the risk from a health perspective. So we have to be able to flex that model. And so this is where like conceptually we talk about this from low risk, medium risk, high risk, what compounds fit within each model, and then applying that to the client, right? And this is where it's like, if you look at my clientele roster, the PD models are all the fuck over the place because there's however X many clients that I have times the risk profiles over the end goal, over personal expectations, and then that just gets built out for that individual. So it's not that there's things that aren't consistently used from client to client. It's just understanding the level at which you deploy for each client. And that's where coaching comes from.
Okay, cool. What do you, what's been the most challenging aspect of being a prep coach up to this point for you personally and specifically, Luke?
Sleep. No. Most challenging. I can tell you what it is now. Right now, it's a balanced perspective. I'm very passionate about what I do. Like I was traveling Friday, Saturday. I slept an hour Friday night because I was up doing client work and looking at stuff to improve my coaching. And I looked at the clock and it was like 2:45 in the morning. I was like, oh shit, I should probably go to bed. But I had to be up at 4 a.m. to leave the next day. And it's like, that's not a very good attribute to have when balance is what, there needs to be some semblance of that, right? Because I'm traveling a lot for shows and doing all that and educating for G3 University and building out content for that. So it's probably the balance part, because it's all on me, which everything I've done through my entire life has been pushed me towards doing something that's like that, right? Is learning to potentially take a step back from it every once in a while. Because we're sitting here on a Sunday recording podcasts. I would up at 5 a.m. doing client work before this, and I'm going to do more when we're finished. It's like, it's the work 7 days a week type of thing, and being able to manage that with, I've got a baby on the way now coming in March and that kind of stuff. So I'd probably say that's the hardest part. It's a good problem to have because it's a product of coaching growing to the level that it has. But that's probably the hardest part, because I take it personally when a client loses. Like, it eats me alive. And my clients know this. Like, I'm on a call or on a voice note or something to them, already talking to them about what we could have done better in that prep and how we're going to fix that on this next off season into the next prep. The day after, the day of, they compete. And it's like, it's people say, like, from other coaches, that you have to stay detached because it's part of the process and you're going to lose. And at the end of the day, it's just competing. It's like, yeah, but I see the best client process happens when I'm attached, because it creates this personal relationship with this individual where it's not a dictator down to someone below you. It's this equal partnership where we're communicating and I'm making the final decision, but it allows for that communication to happen at a level that they feel comfortable telling me everything they need to tell me. So that will never change for me. I can't do it. I can't treat someone like they're a number. But as a product of that, I work a lot. And that's probably the hardest part from a prep coach perspective as of right now.
And if you're being really honest with yourself, which, I think as a business owner and, somebody that's, wanting to pursue more and learn more and be the best version of yourself, I think we all have to kind of have these looks in the mirror and talks with ourselves, like what you are, the life that you're living right now, especially with the baby on the way. Like, I saw that on your Instagram, so congrats on that. But the truth is, it's unsustainable for the long term, right?
Yeah, and it's honestly a product of the level I want to coach at. I have an opportunity right now from a coaching perspective that's not presented to many people in our industry, and I'm not going to let that pass me by. And there will be a point where, I lower my client load and I'm doing more for J3 University from an education standpoint. So there will be more of a differential between how many clients I coach and how many shows I go to per year. But if the truth comes out, it's like, my goal is to be coaching athletes who are competing for Olympias. And if I don't do this right now, and my wife's fully aware of it and supports it 100%, I'm not going to be there. Like, this is just what it takes to coach at that level. And this is kind of where the conversation of my personal bodybuilding comes, is like, staying up till 2:45 doing client work is not the greatest thing for my own personal bodybuilding. But it is the best thing for my business and coaching at the level that I want to coach at. And so at the end of the day, like, yeah, it's a lot and it's not sustainable, but it's also what's going to have to happen for the next 3 years, so that in 5 years, I'm coaching Olympians and that's my main focus and that's all I'm doing. So yeah, is it a 15-year sustainable model? No. Do I have business plans that's going to allow me to leverage into what I want to be in 10, 15 years? Absolutely. Right. So it's just the opportunity presented right now is not what I'm going to let go by.
Is this an opportunity that you've made public, or is it something you're waiting to announce?
Waiting probably a little bit. And when I say the opportunity that I've been presented, it's probably more the people's process that I get to be a part of. It's more so like these clients that I'm coaching are so invested into their personal process. I know 100% that I can make them better. People don't realize, like, coaching is a hard dynamic, because I can be 120% invested into you, but if you're not, then it's not going to present itself on stage. And just the amount of people that I'm working with right now, I God love my clientele. They are the greatest humans on the face of this earth. They are that invested into their own process, which now you have two parties working together that are 120% invested into what they're doing. It's like, yeah, that's going to lead to a better outcome. It's like, and I'll give him a shout out, Josh Ponton, the bodybuilding dad on Instagram. He's doing his first show this year. He's going to be on stage at 2:30 to 2:35 for his first show in contest shape. What that kid or what that guy has an opportunity to do from a 5-year perspective is uncanny. So of course I'm going to do things like stay up till 3 a.m. to make sure that he's got what he needs to do. So like, and part of the reason I stayed up that late is I had to take a flight that had a layover. The internet was down on both airplanes. So I land, I immediately get to work. I make sure he's got his high day for the next day. I just stayed up because I knew he's at the point where he gets up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. for cardio. He messaged me how he felt. I responded to him, made sure that he was good to go for the day, and then I went to bed. And it's like, I'm going to do that if I have to. It's like we had Kuba competing at the UK Arnold. It's like I was staying up till 1 a.m. to make sure that he had his plan for the first few meals every single day that week. It's like I'm not gonna not do that, right? So yeah, and that Kuba situation was a little bit of a different dynamic because it was more like me being the second eye. But that's the kind of thing where if I'm working with someone, I don't care if I have to pull 4 all-nighters in a row, I'm gonna win. And if whatever that takes to win is what I'm gonna do.
Yeah. All right, man. We're gonna start wrapping up because I know you're busy.
I appreciate it.
But I do sincerely appreciate, man, just all the information that you're sharing and giving us. A couple last things. Do coaches need coaches in your estimation, Luke?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's very few who can stay objective enough through a process to coach themselves. John does it. God bless him. If you know John personally, you know he's probably the most objective human on the face of this planet. So he's able to do that. But there's very few and far between who can. I will say a large portion of my clientele roster are coaches themselves. I have John run my nutrition for me. I could probably do it. I don't really want to do it. I just want to upload that onto someone else. So yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's an absolute yes.
Okay. In your estimation, what makes a coach great, or what makes coaches great in terms specifically of prep coaches?
3 things, mainly. A passion for the sport that is unwavering, and probably specifically a passion for coaching that's unwavering. Because there's times, man, where you like look at the clock and you're like, why the fuck am I still up right now? And it's like, if you don't love it to that level, you're not going to give that client your all. And so that would probably be the first. Second would be a desire to always continue learning. Because you start seeing success as a coach, it's easy to say like, hey, I'm winning. You know, y'all can fuck off. I don't need to learn anything. But there's always an opportunity to learn with every individual you speak to, even if it's someone who doesn't know things to a level that you do. You could learn something about managing that person psychologically or managing a client from an emotional standpoint. So always trying to continue to learn. And then 3, and this is where I always say, like, I'll always have the personal side of my coaching, is being willing to personally get to know that person that you're working with. People are going to probably roast me for that comment, but I just don't see how the highest level coaches, or I don't see how someone can expect to coach at the highest level without understanding that. And it's probably a product of being given opportunities of working with people who are the genetic elite, where that aspect of it, they're so good that it probably doesn't overly matter. But in my opinion, you're still leaving progress on the table for that person of how high they can take themselves. So I think if you have those 3 attributes, you're going to get to a point where you're continually learning. You've built rapport with all of your clients because they know how invested you are in their process. And you're constantly looking to improve, and it's an unwavering because of your love for coaching for the sport. And if you have those three, like, I don't see why someone wouldn't continue to improve every year.
What's something specifically within the coaching realm, again, within kind of prep coaching, bodybuilding, fitness, that you would like to maybe see the coaches level up, or you would like something to change that you see with a lot of the coaching that's going on?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on this. It's probably the PED knowledge mainly. There's a detachment and understanding that you're dealing with an actual human being. Sometimes I feel like that some people just say, hey, take these drugs, and don't realize this is an actual person with a life that we're dealing with. That's not saying you don't take risks, you got to, but probably more that understanding of why we're doing everything we're doing. Because like, I was lucky. A lot of the classes I took in grad school, like I took pharmacology classes at UF because it's integrated with the medical school. I took classes around that, where that, alongside consulting with a lot of clinicians and John and all this, like, there's a development level from a learning perspective that's always evolving and improving. But I don't think a lot of people take it to that level. And so whether you do or not, understanding that you are working with a human and being able to admit when someone needs to go to someone else for professional help, those kind of coincide together, and understanding what our role is as a coach, and keeping that always at the forefront of your mind.
Okay, cool. Last question I'm going to ask you, Luke, and then I'll give you kind of the final say, and then I'll do a quick outro. Do you have any gym pet peeves?
Gym pet peeves. Oh goodness. Okay. Bodybuilding culture has changed a lot since I started, right? Social media has changed that. And I'm all for like promoting yourself and doing social media content and doing all that kind of stuff. My biggest pet peeve is probably when that becomes the priority over the actual pursuit. You get people doing things that are just for the follows and just for the likes, or they're 180 pounds soaking wet, posing for the camera, acting like they're the best thing since sliced bread. It's like, I love the fact that you're confident and you know that you're improving. That's great. But I sometimes wish that there was a requirement to spend years without social media doing bodybuilding before that became a thing, because that's kind of how it started for me, where I think we would see like the actual pursuit of bodybuilding be what people are chasing, rather than the social media exposure that bodybuilding can have for you. So I don't know if that's a gym pet peeve, but it's probably the fact that these people are more in the gym concerned with the video they're getting than actually training, is probably the pet peeve that I have. Most of the time people are pretty courteous and do the things they're supposed to be doing, but yeah, that's probably the biggest pet peeve, and why I want to build my own private facility soon. Is like, if you're gonna come train, like, let's train. It's fine if you set up your tripod while you do your set, do that, that's cool, but that's probably the biggest one for me.
Cool, man. Okay, Luke, before I do a quick outro here, man, any final thoughts, any final words that you have, any information that you want to give us, any shout outs? I'm going to turn it over to you, man. I'll do a quick outro, and then that'll be a wrap. So platform's yours.
Yeah, I think the final thing just with all of this is just, I follow the podcast, so I really appreciate you having me on, first off. But second off is like, learn to love the process. And that is the most cliche, cheesiest thing you could probably say at the end of a podcast. But no matter what bodybuilding ends up becoming, from how you make a living doing it or a social media perspective, if that's what you root yourself in, you're always going to be able to move forward and love what you do and live the life you want to live every day. And I'm blessed to say that I wake up every day doing the things that I love. And that started with a passion for the sport that was rooted in the general process. And I think that's where like no off switch in the pursuit of results comes from, is like that's the core of the mentality and the person and the individual that you want to see. And whether that changes for someone, like for me, it's changed from my personal bodybuilding pursuit into taking no all switch with the clientele I work with. It's okay if that evolves for you, but it should start with the industry and what you're doing and aiming to leave the industry better than you found it. It's the whole reason I do what I do. And I think that's like, if y'all take anything from this, like bar any educational information shit, like that's great. I love it. But just aim to be the best version of yourself within this. And if you do that, you're going to impact a lot of people. As far as like the shameless plug shit, YouTube is No Switch Fitness. We also do a lot of content for John's channel for J3 University. So you can see the podcast on there, the J3 University podcast. Instagram for me is No Switch Fitness. Obviously, I'll be on the J3 University platform and app doing content there as well. So yeah, that's probably the main places to find me. Like coaching inquiries can come through the link in my bio, or the website, whichever you prefer. And that's kind of everything for me. Yeah.
Cool. All right, Luke, I really appreciate you taking some time and share your life story, share your bodybuilding story, and just kind of drop some of those knowledge bombs that I know everybody appreciates. Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. All of you who are tuning in to this episode of Behind the Muscle podcast, I just want to say thank you so very much. Quickly here, as we wrap up this great conversation with Luke today, please, if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button on YouTube, and then take this episode with Luke, share it on your Instagram stories. Make sure you tag Luke, tag Behind the Muscle, so that we know that you listened specifically to this episode and found great value in it, in which I know you did. And then finally, I will leave you all with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.